very, in the book, you're incredibly adept at bringing very complicated scientific information to down-to-earth reader and making it very accessible, kind of simple descriptions of the brain, and how you describe use the analogy of the rainforest. Was that just from reading kind of science books? Are you a scientist?
I am not. I don't even know how to pronounce most of the words that I now know about dementia at all, because they're all read. I've never had any contact with anyone really on a professional level. I did an English degree at St Andrews, where I now live, and met my husband there, who was a philosopher. Incredibly useful, educational, degrees. And other than having children, I've never had any real hospital-type, medical-type experience. And that's one reason why we took on Nancy and Morris, because we were really naive about the whole question and thought we could cushion it, thought that, I very stupidly thought that a lot of the time the reason people with dementia were patently miserable, confused, upset, hostile, was because they weren't being looked after properly, and that we would cushion it and we would make it all right, which of course is impossible, because it's what's going on inside a person that makes it not all right. So it was cathartic for me. When Nancy went to bed, I would read on the internet as much as I could find. I gobbled information. And this is at the point at which I started to think, no, I want to write a book actually, because there's nothing out there, and I read everything. I mean, I have a library of dementia books. Some of them are American with exclamation marks, One of them's called The Myth of Alzheimer's, which is great. I particularly recommend that one. Not. So I read them all, and they were either of this sort of slightly wacky camp. I mean, it's not really wacky, it works for some people, but the buzzword now is person-centered care, and it's all about going along with the delusions of the person with dementia and living in their world as much as possible. In other words, carer, your life is over, really, in effect. And we tried that a bit with Nancy, but it didn't work. We had a few days of taking up her prompt that she was late for the office. So I made her an office, in our office, and she played a bit like a kindergarten child actually, with the computer and with paper clips and bits of paper, and was busy. But after about 10 minutes she would slip, you see, there was no consistency, that's the trouble. She'd slip back into our reality and would be horrified that she was sitting in the office playing with bits of paper, and run around saying, what are you doing and why are you lying to me? Which is a very difficult question to answer. I mean, Oliver James thinks it's, the best thing since sliced bread, but I've had lots of emails from people saying, I was so grateful to my fault, because I just didn't have the right kind of granny. Nancy isn't the right kind of granny either. She isn't the granny of the book, and to carry out the simple kind of Oliver James steps of living in dementia reality just didn't work, because it actually made everything worse. So the books were either of that sort, or they were of the Daily Telegraph Guide to Alzheimer's sort, which says, right, here's what you have to do. You have to have soothing music, you have to have dim light, you have to have child-type protection for cupboards and fridges. You have to not invite people into the house because that's going to frighten them. You have to not go out because you can't leave them on their own. Your life is now this. Get used to it. Which was very depressing. So there didn't seem to be anything that steered a course in between and said, well, look, this is what it's really like for carers. And this is what it's like when you try to live by the books, and this is why it goes wrong. And so that's what Keeper is.
And so while you were living with her, you wrote diaries which clearly contain a lot of the dialogue, which is brilliantly retold in the book. But a question which I imagine has come to us, and it came, I guess, to John Bailey and so on. You're writing a book about someone who can't answer back.
Yeah.
And that obviously raises a sort of moral dilemma.
It does.
And so I know that you've been asked this before, but it's interesting to hear.
I haven't had actual fruit thrown at me yet, but there was some tutting at the last festival I did, for sure. Yeah. Well,
your discussions with your husband, how he...
Well, he was behind it, which was a big help. He said, you know, he read bits of the diary that I was writing and some of the science that I'd been researching, because he was more of a sciencey person. So I was running that by him, because he knows about, you know, Heraclitus and all that stuff, and I didn't. And he said, you know, this is really valuable, you've got to get this published. So that was a big help. And then I was still dithering. When the piece appeared in The Guardian, which was the first thing, there were some really snide comments on the thing. You should never read them, ever. Especially the Daily Mail, ever. No, it's a mistake. But I did, and that was disheartening. And I wasn't going to go ahead with the book. Actually, we got to the point of saying, it's too hard, not for Nancy, but for Maurice. But then Maurice died, and he died 2 years ago. And when he died, in the care home, he only survived in the care home for 12 months. He was actually physically, completely hollowed out by the whole experience. He just was tired. And he died, and at that point, now that Nancy is completely through the looking glass and doesn't relate, I mean, I am literally a stranger. I'm just as much a stranger as her Eastern European carer is. You know, that there didn't seem to be any problem with offending Nancy. So, and we thought it was valuable. And the response has been that it is valuable. So I'm fairly guilt-free on the question.
Yes.
Still have the odd niggle. But there's lots of guilt attached to being a carer, that's the thing, all the time. Because nothing you do is ever enough.
Did the doctors not help?
No, quite the reverse. I mean, there are occasions like the day that the physio people arrived from the hospital and told us everything we had to get installed in the house. You know, and you have to have a walk-in wet room for her because she can't step over the little bit of metal that's on the shower, that kind of thing. You know, and that's going to cost you £6,000. But that's what you need to do. And you need to have a baby listener in your bedroom so that you can go and sort out anything that needs seeing to at 3 in the morning.
Yeah. So how long?
You do start to feel like you're staff rather than a person.
Yeah.
And this really upsets me. I mean, this is something I feel quite radical about, is that I think there's far too much emphasis put on the well-being of the cared for, and not enough on the well-being of the carers. Carers are treated appallingly, and they save the NHS £87 billion a year, you know, and are abused, really, taken for granted. So I didn't find there was an awful lot of support at all.
Do you find, I mean, that has been a subject much discussed in interviews with you, isn't it? And raised with your prizes and things, the sort of the neglect of the carers.
Yeah, 5 million carers in Britain.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
And lots of them don't have the opt-out clause that I had. I mean, there's no money.
They're still there.
It's not just about the money, is it? It's about guilt. People don't like to feel that they've given up. You know, and the analogy of being a parent to a child is quite apt in a way, because you do feel a little bit on the day in which you pack someone's bag to go to a care home that you are a parent of a child you are giving up for adoption or fostering, and that you have failed. That is how it feels. And that's wrong. We've got to get past that. You know, this is an ill person who needs a hospital. That's what it is.